Well, Eddie Howe has just met the press for the first time since the window closed. Obviously, the press conference today really was about the Arsenal game, a huge game, one of the biggest games in Newcastle's, modern history. But at the end of the day, the deadline yesterday passed without Newcastle bringing in a player. Now, I am well aware that most fans weren't expecting anything yesterday. They knew that it was going to be another barren January window. Eddie Howe was, stated that many times. But now, the aftermath with other clubs like Aston Villa, Man City, who are also competing for that Champions League place, they've strengthened. Newcastle haven't been able to. In fact, Newcastle, if we're being totally honest, have regressed a little bit. They've lost two players. They've lost two squad members who could come in and help the team get over the line. Only 12 months ago, Newcastle didn't act in the January window. We were told PSR was the issue, that Newcastle had to be cautious in the window, and ultimately they didn't bring anybody in last January, and they ended the season outside the European places. So who's to say one or two signings last January wouldn't have got Newcastle over the line? And since then, obviously Newcastle have lost players, good players like Elliot Anderson, like Yankuba Minter, and it's been a very difficult time in some ways in terms of squad numbers. But I think really you can't argue with where Eddie Howe has got the team with what he's got. He's held on to Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, Bruno Guimaraes. They're all still here. Newcastle are still in the hunt for the Champions League. They've got this huge game against Arsenal tomorrow night, and Wembley final could be very much on the horizon. They're still in the FA Cup, so there is a lot to be positive about. Do not get me wrong. This is not a rant or a complaint or anything like that. Newcastle are in a good, sound position. My only concern is that Newcastle's rivals have been able to go and spend. Eddie Howe in his press conference basically saying that he felt that every window you go into, you want to strengthen the squad, you want to be stronger than you were when you went into it, and basically accepted that Newcastle aren't stronger because of it. So there's a lot of debate to be had about that. PSR, a lot of people have kind of jumped on the next window already with the narrative saying that Newcastle are going to have a certain amount to spend. The kind of PSR has unlocked, and they're going to have 80 million, 100 million. Eddie Howe not committing to any of that. I'm sure he wouldn't commit to a set figure anyway, but I don't get the impression from what he's saying that Newcastle are going to go on this huge shopping spree in the summer unless the rules change, unless Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, unless a big player is sold. It does feel like Newcastle the next couple of windows maybe could be in this position where they have to be careful. I mean, they spent money last year. They bought in Willasula for £15 million. They made the acquisition of Lacademos, the goalkeeper, and they did spend some money, but these weren't huge signings. And I think ultimately for Newcastle fans, if they want to see the team in the Champions League on a regular basis, which is what the aim is within the club, then I think they'll probably want to see a bit more progress. But look, we'll see what happens in the summer. Getting in the Champions League was always going to be key, and if they can't do that, then I'm sure that'll give Eddie Howe a lot more scope to spend money. We do know whatever the club earn should be getting spent, and obviously things like the stack and the Adidas deal, all this should come to fruition. And at the end of the day, it's one where Newcastle supporters will believe that long-term things are in a good place. Short-term, we might just have to box clever a little bit in the next couple of windows. But overall, Eddie Howe's mood, a little bit of frustration, but I don't think he was throwing teacups around yesterday. I think he knew that Newcastle were going to be in this position, and that's exactly how it proved to be. So, big game against Arsenal. Newcastle 2-0 up. A lot of people talking about the early goal. I'm sure Arsenal would like an early goal as well. But I think, the atmosphere should be set up perfectly for this. And Newcastle, doesn't matter how they get through, I would take a 1-0 defeat, to be totally honest, tomorrow night. As long as Newcastle get through and get to Wembley, we'd all be delighted about that. So plenty to look forward to at Newcastle United.